Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm well. Thank you so much for asking, Rory. I hope you're well too, Rory. And both Rory and I hope that you are well listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. You've joined us at episode 262. And we've got 3 stops on today's journey, starting off with theory and practice, where we look, how does theory come alive in our practice? And today we're going to be speaking about the difference between eclectic, integrative, and pluralistic therapy. And then we move on to practice today, where we're going to be looking at the importance of psychological education for our clients. And finally, in Practice Matters, which is the CPD section, Rory reached out to the National Counselling Society and spoke with Faye Blackwell, Head of Engagement and Development, on the topic of organisational membership and development. So let's get stuck in, Rory, and the difference between eclectic, integrative, and pluralistic therapy.
Yes, well, I think this will be quite an interesting topic to discuss in a short amount of time. But these terms are bandied about quite a lot. You hear people talk about integrative, pluralistic, eclectic, but what actually do they mean? Well, my view has always been that integrative therapy is where you integrate 2 or more modalities. And I'll take a very simple example here, where you're using maybe CBT and person-centered therapy. And it's always the blend. So I'm going to talk about the soup analogy. If you have tomato soup and you get a recipe, it'll probably say you need tomatoes, seasoning, water, onions, and that type of thing. And if you just poured those into a bowl and handed them to somebody, you wouldn't particularly have a soup. What you would have is a number of ingredients that could make a soup. And that is the difference, in my view, between eclectic and integrative therapy. Integrative therapy is where the theories are blended. There's a distinct flavour to them, and they're used very skillfully. And there's no seam. You cannot tell where one intervention starts and another intervention ends. And I think that's really, really important. I have a sense that a lot of practitioners are actually integrative therapists. They may be like ourselves, Ken, person-centered by the base, but actually we may bring in other areas to work with. We could, we're going to be talking about psychological education in the next part of the podcast. We could be talking about, helping people with thought books or mind watching, where someone thinks about, those automatic negative thoughts that sometimes pop into our heads that say awful things, and managing those. So, it's a blend, and I think it's really important as if you are an integrative therapist, you have a really good grounding in the theories that you're integrating with. So if you're person-centered, you should understand the model and the personality development that goes with person-centered therapy. The 19 propositions, 7 stages of process. And if you're working with CBT as part of that integration, you should have an understanding of, things like automatic negative thoughts, about being able to, you know, put what's going on for the client, that their irrational thinking in some cases, into context to help them be able to kind of manage that. And as I said at the top of the broadcast, I have a sense that actually a lot of us work integratively, more than probably we think. And eclectic therapy, I'll give you an example of eclectic therapy. It was many years ago. I had a student who had a therapist, and every week they just try something different. It's a bit, oh, let's do a mind map. Oh, this week let's do, automatic negative thoughts. Oh, let's do something else. And it just didn't feel like it was too blended in. There is a part of therapy that can use mind maps and automatic negative thoughts, but if they're just pulled out of a hat like a magician, it's going to feel a bit disjointed, rather like having your soup delivered in the raw ingredients rather than the cooked and blended product, if you like. And pluralistic therapy is a bit of a new development. It's been pioneered by Mick Cooper here in the UK, Professor Mick Cooper, and it's about client preferences. What does the client want to work with? What is the best fit for the client? And it's becoming a growing edge in therapy now, because it doesn't rely on meta models, the models that we may have been taught at college or university. It relies on us working with the client, asking what they want. What is the outcome you want? And here's the thing, part of that could be coaching. Could be a coaching element with pluralistic therapy. It's whatever the client wants. And I would encourage people, if they're interested in pluralistic therapy, to look up Mick Cooper's blog, because he's written huge amounts of it. And clients are wanting, in my experience, clients are more demanding about what they want from therapy. Certainly, if they're paying for it, they may have a certain issue they want resolving. And as therapists, we have to work at their pace and with them, Ken.
Indeed. You spoke about pluralistic therapy, Professor Mick Cooper, and relatively recent development in counselling and psychotherapy. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we've got a great lecture delivered by Professor Mick Cooper in our Counsellor CPD library, where Professor Mick Cooper goes into some detail of what pluralistic therapy is and how that kind of works for the client. And I guess, Rory, when I look at that eclectic and I look at integrative for me feels that it integrates. They work well together. It's like choreography. You wouldn't have a piece of music where you would dance the twist, the foxtrot, and the tango in the same piece of music, because it would look and feel strange. It would interrupt you. And I think that's the thing you were discussing earlier when we're talking about the eclectic. It can be interruptive if we are using one modality and then quickly check to another and then quickly change to another one. It may feel for the client like, oh, that's not working, so now we need to try that. Oh, no, that's not working, so we need to try this. There's something wrong with me because it's not working and we need to try different things all the time. Whereas integrative will not feel like anything different is being used. It will feel just like part of the process, like a well choreographed dance. And I guess if you got a really good choreographer, they would be able to maybe meld dance moves together, and they do meld dance moves together, but it's dance moves that fit together, because not all modalities will fit together. You've got here and now, you've got back there and then. We don't want to jump from here and now to back there and then to maybe what's going to happen in the future with a bit of coaching. That is eclectic. It's jumping around, whereas integrative just works seamlessly together. And of course, it's based on the research of what works well.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think I like the idea of blending together. And I think part of understanding where integrative fits is being confident in you understand the model of therapy that you're using. And if it fits the clients, I think that there is an idea that, some therapies will fix everything, that they're a cure-all. And sometimes clients want something else, that clients don't fit the model of therapy that we're being taught. So an example of that would be somebody who may be frightened of bees and wants some kind of desensitization therapy. Person-centered therapy, although would help underpin the relationship and maybe alleviate any anxiety the client has about working with the therapist, probably wouldn't be too effective if somebody was, going on holiday and they wanted to make sure that they were not frightened to death of bees, or scared of flying would be another good example. So it's about understanding what the client is presenting. Does it fit within that modality of therapy? And is there something else that would be more effective? And I think it speaks to us not being too dogmatic about our therapeutic position, not believing that our therapeutic position will be okay for the client because it does everything. We have to listen to the client. That is why there's so many different forms of therapy. They approach the human condition in slightly different ways. And I think in defense of eclectic, it may be that somebody just comes in and says, I really don't want kind of lots of empathy or lots of listening. I've had a client like this. I just want this sorting out. Can you help me with this? And I said, yes, I can. And we had one session and that was it. They were fine. They sorted it out within one session. It's very unusual, I have to say, very unusual. But they'd sorted it out in one session. Thank me very much. Shook my hand and went. And I reflected to my supervisor. I said, this is very unusual. And I said, I just drew on one particular idea. And she said, well, what did the client say? And I said, well, the client was delighted. Client went out, relieved, happy, clearer about what the situation is. And that was it. And she said, well, is that not what you should be doing as a therapist?
Ah. Yes.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons, isn't there? And it all comes back to client, the fit of the client, and of course your training and your continuing professional development. We say that a lot, don't we? So if you're looking at practicing pluralistic therapy, there's study. You're going to want to be going and doing a course that is going to teach you about pluralistic therapy and how to use that. Of course, there are integrative counselling courses where you're going to learn what theories and therapies meld together and work well together. But as you said, Rory, I think that there is more and more integrative working in a practitioner's kind of stable, if you were, through years of practice and self-development, because you're going to be learning more things, you're going to be learning more ways to serve, and they may not be 100% match to your base modality. And I take person-centered, for instance, where it's here and now, no leading, no homework, any of that kind of stuff. Well, of course, if you've done CPD in areas and a client is presenting with something where you know that you have information and maybe a technique that might be helpful for them, to not share that would not be in service of that client. So I think it's an interesting time. When I studied, when I looked around, there wasn't much talk of integrative counselling, and not many integrative counselling courses offered that I could find. That was from, we're talking about nearly 10, 15 years ago now.
Yeah.
Now, if you look around, there's a lot more integrative therapeutic courses that are being offered out there, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think it to some extent matches the change of mood within clients.
Yeah.
There's no bigger advocate of the work of Carl Rogers than myself. I love his work. I'm immersed in his work. But I have to hold my hands up and say that, he died in 87, which is a fair amount of years ago now. Remember, it's people listening here who weren't born in 87, possibly. And the world has moved on. People understand. We've got a massive more detailed understanding now of how trauma affects people. Just to put it into context, PTSD came into the world as an idea in 1980, 7 years after Rogers sadly left us. So I think as I said at the top of the topic, most therapists now at some level are integrative. If they're using any information from CPD to help clients, that by its very nature is integrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when we're saying theory and practice, how does this apply to your practice? A great thing, a great exercise in your in practice and you're working is to have a think. What are you blending together? Are you seamlessly blending different ideas together? Take that into supervision, chat with your peers, and most importantly, download Rory's super duper handout on the difference between integrative, pluralistic, and eclectic therapy. And where can you get that? Well, just go to our mother website. It's counsellingtutor.com. If you haven't been there and you've listened, you're a regular listener to our podcast, please go and have a look. We've got such a cool search engine on the homepage where you can find out loads of information. Just put in your keywords and it'll search our site. We have got hundreds and hundreds of academic researched documents on counselling and psychotherapy skills and running a practice. So go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, find your way to episode 262. You can download Rory's super duper handout, the difference between eclectic, I wanted to say electric there, Rory, that wouldn't
electric
work.
therapy. No,
electric
don't go
therapy.
there,
No, none of that. Eclectic, integrative, and pluralistic therapy. Go and get that handout. And that kind of reverses us out of theory in practice. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. And we go head first into practice today, where I think was kind of following the theme through, speaking about psychological education. So if I guess we went and our modality was 100% pure person-centered, then there's nothing in the model that suggests that we would engage in psychological education. But it's a massive area, and I think to not do so when we have information that will benefit the client is not best serving them, Rory. So in a way, I guess it ties in with that integrative approach we spoke about earlier.
Yes, it's very interesting, this ongoing conversation we're having, Ken, about building in other information into our practice. And, psychological education, I think, is something that every therapist should engage with. And basically what psychological education is helping the client understand their own processes. And this is certainly applicable to trauma. When someone's had a trauma response to something. And I was a little resistant as a younger therapist to bringing anything into what I considered pure person-centered approach. And, as I started to get clients who'd had more experience of trauma, my supervisor was fairly insistent that I at least thought about the impact of telling clients or explaining to clients why they acted in such a way. And I can remember on one occasion, I won't speak about a client, but I'll speak about a classroom scenario. We were talking about negative automatic thoughts. And I was saying that sometimes our midbrain, our kind of emotional brain, throws up all sorts of nonsensical thinking that has nothing to do with our actions. They're just thoughts that pop up. And I was speaking to the class, and I said, when I leave here tonight, because I used to teach in the evenings, I said, occasionally if I'm driving home, I'll think, wonder what would happen if I ran my car over that bus stop full of people. Now, I've got no intention of running bus stops full of people over. It was just a nonsense thought that popped up into my mind. And one of the students actually burst into tears, and I said, whatever's the matter? And she said, I have thoughts like that, and I just thought I was a bad person. And I said, no, that's how our brains work. And everybody else said, oh, I think like that all the time. And we had a sea of hands going up. You never guess what I was thinking the other day. And it's really important. And by using that psychological education, it freed that person up. They went out of that classroom a different person. And the same thing can happen in therapy. How many times, Ken, as practitioners, have we sat in front of clients who said, why did I freeze when I was attacked?
Yeah.
Why didn't I fight back? Why did I give in so easily? And they beat themselves up time and time and time again. And just to be able to say, your brain goes into autopilot at times like this, and it just made what it thought was the best decision for you. And and you wouldn't have had any control over that. The relief that clients have, it's palpable.
Yeah.
They'll say, so I had no control over it. I'll say, well, very little. Your brain took executive control, the fight or freeze, or friends and flop at the other ends, your brain took over. Why did I go into like a fugue state and faint? What's your brain disassociating to protect you?
Yeah.
And to explain that information and to them to go away and go, well, actually, that is why I am like I am. That's what happened to me. And the key thing, that phrase that my supervisor drilled into me, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
It's not your fault. So powerful, Ken. So, I don't know. So relieving for the client.
Can make such a massive difference. The words that are still banging around in my head from the classroom scenario that you shared are these. I just thought I was a bad person.
Yeah.
That's how a person was feeling, because they didn't have access to information that is available, that has been researched and shown to be true. And I think the important thing here with psychological education is that it requires, again, back to continuing professional development. Within my counselling training, we didn't go deep into neurology and how the brain works and the different parts of the brain that fire and the limbic system. And it wasn't covered because you're not there to learn about that. You're there to learn how to become a counsellor. But psychological education requires learning outside of our base modality. It's about learning more about the human condition and what is biologically happening within the brain. And that requires training. You want to make sure that what you're talking about is based in fact and has been researched in service of your clients there. And I was thinking about that. It's interesting that you touched on it. Why did I just stand there and let the muggers take my watch and my wallet and everything? Because isn't there I've heard about fight and flight. I should have either fought them, but I must be a coward if I didn't fight them. And I didn't even run away. What is wrong with me? There was a gap. I could have run through that gap. What is wrong with me that I just stood there and complied and gave them my watch and gave them my wallet? And that can go around and around and around and sit with a person for years or decades. And it does create trauma. And I think trauma is a seed for these kind of thought patterns or regrets, or why didn't I, and I could have, and I should have, and I could have told them this, and I should have done that. And all of that is part of the human condition. Within that moment, you don't have a choice, Rory. You're not reasoning and having a choice. Your brain is in emergency mode.
Absolutely. And I like that emergency mode, because that's exactly how the brain works. The amygdala, those almond-shaped little sets of cells either side of the brain start to click in, and they literally set the fire alarm off, and your middle brain goes into overdrive, and it's got one job and one job only, and that is to keep you alive. That's its job. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a clock. So, when our top brains kick in, our thinking caps, if you like, cerebral cortex, and we can then think about the event, we're still reliving we can still relive the event. And, one of the best things I ever did was study to be a trauma-informed practitioner. I did a trauma-informed practice course, and it radically reshaped how I work with clients with trauma, radically reshaped it. And it's something I'm really, really passionate about, having seen the freedom that clients can gain through having a bit of information that they can understand their own processes is incredible. And I built a trauma-informed practice course. I built a 32-lesson trauma-informed practice course. And if you want to see a sample of psychoeducation, and a free video, free CPD video. If you go to podcast episode 262, go to Counselling Tutor, our mother website, find the tab 262, and in the show notes, you'll see a link. If you click on that, that's a link to a free a lecture on psychoeducation. It's one of the 32 lectures that I've written and delivered on psychoeducation. I even hired an actor to be a client to show how a therapist can stabilize a client if they're into disassociation. So you actually see me working with someone who's disassociated them and bringing them back into the here and now and being safe. And psychoeducation is the beginning of that. I think that it's something that I would say should be taught at first trainings now, because we have so many people present in the therapy room with trauma. I think there's an argument for it to be built into first trainings.
100%.
So that, yeah.
I'd sign that document, Rory. I'd stand on that soapbox and campaign for that, because it's so true. And I think what was really interesting to me is my view on what trauma was that it had to be some massive event in your life, like a car accident or being mugged. But it doesn't. We're experiencing trauma. Trauma is arising from our day-to-day interactions, and I look back now with this knowledge, understanding, the new knowledge and understanding, and I can see multiple trauma events just in my school days, just in things that teachers said to me or how I felt within certain situations, and having an understanding of trauma. Trauma is presenting in your therapy room. There's no doubt about it. It is. It's part of the human condition. We're prone to trauma, and then from that trauma we will act and react in certain ways that can minimize our life enjoyment. And trauma-informed practice, the course that you built, Rory, is absolutely fantastic. I've seen some of the feedback from the students that have gone through that, and it is exceptional. It's really, really comprehensive. So if you're interested in having a look at a free lecture from Rory's Trauma-Informed Practice course on the importance of psychological education, Rory's told you where you can find it. counsellingtutor.com, podcast tab, episode 262. Right there on that page, a link. You click on it, it's going to take you through to that video. No charge. Enjoy. So that is it. That's practice today. Moving on now to Practice Matters, the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast. You, Rory, reached out to the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. You spoke with Faye Blackwell, who is the Head of Engagement and Development, and the topic is organisation membership and development.
Yes, in this ongoing series of conversations with the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society, we looked at all their functions, how they operate as an organisation. We really pulled the curtain back. And I caught up with Faye Blackwell. She's the Head of Engagement and Development, and she talked about organisational membership and development, and also working regionally with groups to help develop psychological and psychotherapeutic input into communities. And when I caught up with her, this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Faye Blackwell, who's the Head of Engagement and Development at the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. Faye Blackwell, you're very welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Rory.
So you've come on today to explain your role of Head of Engagement and Development. So I guess my first question is, what is Head of Engagement and Development? What is your role?
That's a very good question indeed. Sometimes I ask myself that, Rory. So I've only been with the Society in this role for just over a year now. So it's still very much the role itself is developing and changing as we go along, which actually probably perfectly reflects the role itself, because it's all about representing our individual registrants and members and our organisational members, building those relationships with them and listening very much to ideas, concerns they might have, and adapting that into our values and ethos in the society, and helping us grow in that way alongside our members and the wishes that they have.
Yeah, so we hear a lot of talk about listening to members or listening to the public. Organisations always speak about this, don't they? We're listening, there's a lot of listening being done. But it sounds to me like the listening that you're doing is not only taking the views of individual members and organisational members, but also how that adapts the values of the National Counselling Society, how that might inform the values going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think our values are very much set in place. They've been at the heart of the society from day one, long before I came along. But it's very much about, I think, reflecting what many of our registrants and members do in their practice, which is about building relationships in a creative way, respecting autonomy of the practitioner and of the client, understanding that sometimes things don't always fit into boxes. And so it's about being adaptable and flexible and creative around that. And so when individuals or organisations come to us with different ideas, we'll sit and listen to that and decide whether that's something we can help support them with, or, as you say, develop and incorporate and embed within our values and ethos as we move forwards and grow.
Absolutely, and it sounds to me like there's a lot of different aspects to your role, and some of them are things like opportunities for development, and maybe CPD from professionals and expertise in the field of counselling and psychotherapy.
Yeah, CPD is an interesting one, actually, because although to a certain degree that's not part of my role, I'm not involved in the training side of things so much, or courses. My work within the organisational membership department, however, actually interestingly puts me in touch with lots of really wonderful different charities, specialist organisations. Been in contact with everybody from the Ben Ramers Foundation, who work with informing professional skateboarders about mental health, and taking mental health, well-being and awareness out to them, putting them in touch with counsellors and therapists. And so as such, when we get in touch with these types of organisations, we ask them and provide them with the opportunity of perhaps creating some online CPD or training for our members who may wish to access, that specialist information that perhaps they hadn't sort of necessarily thought about before, isn't currently, commonly on offer.
I think it's a really important part of the role, isn't it, Faye? Because it sounds to me that what you're doing is you're going out to individuals and organisations and communities, and you're saying how best can therapy fit into your life, and how best can we understand you as individuals. You talked about autonomy earlier on, and autonomy is about individualisation, isn't it? Being an individual. So you
Absolutely.
go out. You hear of an opportunity, you hear of a community that may possibly be overlooked in normal services, and then you tailor, you feed that back, and your CPD department tailors or creates CPD opportunities for those communities. So it's a kind of feedback loop, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's just really respecting and honouring, the expertise that some of these organisations have. Some of them are very small grassroots, started sometimes, with a real history that's come on the back perhaps of some trauma or, their own story, their own experiences. And they're building these wonderful different opportunities and organisations that, because, what's really important is it's not just about therapy. So, sometimes it's just very simply about creating an awareness around mental health and well-being much more generally. We've got the recognised counselling services, which is very much about the direct offering of counselling and psychotherapy to individuals, and groups, obviously. However, some of our other organisational members don't offer therapy at all, but they create a space, they create a place where information and knowledge and support is shared to, those specific communities that they work with. And we wholly support and endorse that and work alongside them to make that as good as possible.
Yeah, I think that you strike an important point there, Faye, because mental health, mental well-being, it isn't a one-size-fits-all.
Absolutely.
Not at all, is it? And you have to, as therapists, we often talk about, well, I often talk about it, if I'm honest, meeting clients where they're at. You've got to meet people where they're at. You cannot speak a uniform language in terms of mental well-being to people. You've got to speak a language that they understand and fits for them and builds into their lifestyles. We're an incredibly diverse society now, and it sounds like that's what you're doing. And it sounds really exciting, because it sounds like the organisation is really saying, what do you want, and we'll try and accommodate you.
Do you know what? That's exactly how I describe it to lots of people that get in touch. So very often I'll receive communication from our wonderful membership services team, who are there on the front line. It could be requests from members of the public, or again it could be an individual registrant that's had an experience, that's created an idea, and they come to me and we just sit and have a chat about it, and just come up with ideas. Of course, it doesn't always work out. It's not always possible. We need to be very mindful, of course, of, competencies and frameworks and, accredited registers and all of that stuff that, of course, is really important, maintaining those standards. But whilst at the same time, offering that flexibility and creative thinking that can say, okay, well, let's have a chat about this and see what we can do. Let's see what we can do to develop and support you.
Absolutely. And it seems to have been such a popular initiative that your department, your organisational membership department, has developed over the years. And I believe there's two distinct categories of your department. I wonder if you could share a little bit about that, Faye.
Yeah, that's right. It sort of taps back into what I mentioned a minute ago. So when I very first started, I was with the society. I was handed the organisational membership department to run, and alongside my wonderful colleague Nicola. And at that point, it really was just organisations that offered direct therapeutic services, counselling, psychotherapy. But what happened is I ended up going to lots of different conferences and meetings and seminars, and I came into contact with so many other incredible different charities and organisations that, as we've already mentioned, didn't necessarily offer counselling, but were there supporting, their different, whether that was children and young people or veterans or, whatever that might be in a different sort of capacity to offering therapy. So I went back to the team and said, look, these are organisations that really share our values and ethos. And again, create that relationship with their members and their service users, but not necessarily under that counselling label as such. And so that's when we decided, well, why don't we allow them to become organisational members too? And so that's when we separated the department. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, recognised counselling services, does what it says on the tin, and that will be a very rigorous assessment of any organisation that offers that direct therapy to their service users. And on the other side is the organisational members who don't necessarily offer counselling. And that could be anything from different directories. We've also got sort of different tech companies, Paranemo, who we collaborate in different research in advancing technology within the field of counselling, mental health. I've already talked about other grassroots initiatives like the Ben Ramers Foundation. There's a lovely organisation called Back In, who offer substance misuse support in Nottingham, and we're at the moment collaborating on some research with them too. And so many of these relationships have just come from them getting in touch with the society and saying, we've got this idea. Is there anything you can do to help us? Yes. And it might not be something we've ever done before, but again, we just sit, listen, have a chat and work out, is there a role for us? Can we support them in any way?
Yeah, so a more of a facilitative positioning, being able to facilitate and maybe signpost and connect people together. It sounds like a really exciting role. I mean, finally, there's a big focus, I think, on regional groups. And, you off air, you talked about the Northern Ireland Committee. I wonder if you could just share a little bit about the regional aspects to your role.
So Northern Ireland has very much been our sort of pilot for the development of regional groups going forwards. It's definitely got its own flavour. And we're working closely with our committee out there to support our registrants and members and increase visibility and recognition for the society across in Northern Ireland. Other regional groups, though, are much more member-led. We've got a lovely lady called Sarah who's recently, and again, it's come from her idea to a certain degree, got in touch with us. Really said, I think particularly on the back of the COVID pandemic, that recognition of the isolation of the work those of us in private practice have experienced generally as well, but particularly since COVID. And she really wanted to set up just a peer group, just something very social, casual, where people could get together, have a chat, and particularly focus on their own well-being. Something, as we know, that counsellors and practitioners talk a lot about, but we're not always the best people at practicing it. So to come together and support each other in that has been really important, and that group has been flourishing. And so that's something we really are going to drive forwards. And I would say right here and now, any members that are interested in perhaps setting up a regional group in their own area, do get in touch with us. And we'd be very happy to facilitate and support you in doing that.
Well, I think that really leaves me to share with the listener that if you are interested in engagement and development and you want to know more about it, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, our mother website, if you go onto the podcast tab and click podcast episode 262, you'll find a number of links in the show notes which will take you to the different areas of engagement and development, and of course we'll pop in the website address and contact details so that you can make contact. It's been delightful meeting you and talking about an area of a ethical body that is sometimes not often highlighted. So with that in mind, Faye Blackwell, Head of Engagement and Development at the NCS, soon to be the NCPS, the National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society. Thank you so much for joining us.
Big thank you to Faye Blackwell. Thank you to you, Roy, for reaching out, hosting the interviews, bringing us the information that we need to know. This has been episode 262, Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, and we started off with theory and practice. We talked about the differences between eclectic, integrative and pluralistic therapy, terms that are used quite a lot in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, and we tried to do a deep dive into them to try and make them a little bit more accessible. In practice today, we talked about the importance of psychoeducation, a growing edge of service to our clients, and the importance of being able to explain certain events to clients in a psychological way to make them understand how their bodies reacted and why they reacted. And then finally, in Practice Matters, I caught up with Faye Blackwell, Head of Engagement and Development for the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. And we talked about their work with organisations and regional bodies developing a psychotherapeutic intervention. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counsellor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.